Today, we're diving into a major historical puzzle. How do you tell the story of a massive, sophisticated empire that stretched across mountains and jungles, but left behind no written language of its own? This is the incredible story of the Inca, and we're going to figure out how we can possibly know anything about a civilization that never wrote its own history down. And our story really begins with a mystery. Back in 1615, a man named Guaman Poma de Ayala, who was the son of an Inca noble, spent years putting together this incredible 1,000-page history of his people. It detailed their lives, their culture, and the brutal abuses of their Spanish conquerors. He sent his life's work, the only copy, to the King of Spain. And then, poof, it just vanished for 300 years. This one lost book just perfectly captures the challenge we're facing, trying to hear a voice that was almost completely silenced. All right, so here's our game plan for piecing this amazing story together. We're going to start with the big problem, a history without words. Then we'll watch the explosive rise of the empire itself. After that, we'll dive into their totally unique economy, one without any money, and their, well, very strange relationship with the dead. And finally, we'll see how it all came crashing down, and what kind of legacy still survives today. Okay, first things first, let's tackle the source of the problem. You see, almost everything we think we know about the Inca was written down by the Spanish who conquered them. And these accounts were often, let's just say, super biased. I mean, they were trying to justify their own conquest, so they often painted the Inca as illegitimate rulers or even barbarians. So if the Spanish accounts are flawed, what were the Inca themselves using? Well, the Inca weren't without a data system. They had this, the quipu. It's an incredible tool, basically a complex system of knotted ropes that worked like a 3D spreadsheet. They used it for accounting, for tracking census data, for all sorts of record keeping. But their history, their myths, their religion, all of that was oral. It was passed down from one generation to the next. So when the Spanish conquest came and killed the quipu keepers and silenced the storytellers, huge libraries of knowledge just vanished forever. And this right here, this shows a fundamental clash in how they even thought about the past. The Spanish saw history as a straight line. Event A led to event B, which led to event C. Simple. But for the Inca, history was more like a tool. It was flexible, you know? They'd use it to make a point, like justifying a family's claim to a piece of land. They might even tell conflicting stories to serve whatever purpose they needed in the present. So you have the Spanish trying to write a straightforward history about a culture that didn't even think in straight lines. All right, let's shift gears and talk about the empire's insane, explosive growth. And it was all driven by a ruler with maybe one of the greatest names in all of history, Pachacuti. His name literally means earth shaker. And, well, he lived up to it. This was the guy who took a small kingdom and forged it into a continent-spanning empire. And the scale we're talking about is just staggering. This wasn't a small kingdom. We're talking about an empire of 12 million people, stretching 2,500 miles along the spine of the Andes Mountains. Just think about that for a second. They had to govern people living in snowy peaks, humid jungles, and some of the driest deserts on the entire planet. It was a monumental feat of engineering and administration. And this really gets to the heart of what I call the Inca paradox. It's what makes them so endlessly fascinating. On one hand, you have these incredible achievements, sophisticated road networks, mind-boggling agricultural terraces, a complex state bureaucracy, but then you look at what they didn't have. No iron tools, no wheel for transport, no big draft animals like horses or oxen, and, as we've talked about, no written language. It almost doesn't compute, right? How did they pull it off? So how did they expand so incredibly quickly? Well, they had a brutally effective playbook. First, they'd show up and offer gifts, alliances, a chance to join their prosperous empire. But if that was refused, they'd come back with an army of up to 100,000 warriors, banging drums made from the skin of defeated enemies. Yeah. Unsurprisingly, most groups decided it was probably a good idea to join the empire without putting up a fight. Now, how in the world do you run an empire of 12 million people with no markets, no merchants, and not a single coin? It seems impossible. But the Inca had a really unique solution. Everything, and I mean everything, was based on labor. So here's basically how it worked. The state would roll into a newly conquered area and divide up the land and the llama herds into three parts. 2/3 of everything went straight to the state, for the emperor and the aristocracy, and to the state religion, for the priests. And that final third, that was left for the local people to live on. The engine that powered this whole system was the labor tax, called the mita. Your taxes weren't paid with goods or money, they were paid with your time. So if you were a goldsmith, you'd spend a few months of the year making beautiful objects for the emperor. If you were a farmer, you'd spend time working the state's land. This system is what built the roads, fed the armies, and created the empire's incredible wealth, all without a single coin ever changing hands. All right, I hope you're ready for this, because now we get to one of the most wonderfully bizarre and fascinating aspects of Inca society. This is a concept that sounds like it's straight out of a fantasy novel. We're talking about the political power of royal mummies. And no, that is not an exaggeration. That's a literal fact. By the time the empire reached its peak, most of the best land, the best estates, the most wealth was technically owned by dead emperors. So check this out. Here's how this incredible system worked. When an emperor, the Sapa Inca, died, his body was carefully mummified. His political power, the job of being emperor, passed on to his successor. But his wealth, his property, all his palaces and estates, they remained his. His mummy would continue to live, attending feasts, being dressed in fine clothes, and even being consulted on important matters of state. Now, this created a powerful, unstoppable engine for expansion, because every new emperor had to go out and conquer brand new lands just to build up his own estate. So you have this massive, complex, seemingly invincible empire. How did it fall so incredibly fast to a tiny band of foreigners? Well, the answer is that it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of absolute catastrophes that all hit at the exact same time. The collapse happened with shocking speed. It all started with disease. European smallpox actually arrived ahead of the Spanish people, sweeping down from the north and killing untold numbers, including the emperor and his chosen heir. This immediately created a power vacuum, which sparked a devastating civil war between two of his other sons, Huáscar and Atahualpa. And it was into this ravaged, bleeding, and divided empire that Francisco Pizarro and his 168 men just happened to arrive. Just look at these numbers. This highlights the sheer insanity of what happened next. At the town of Cajamarca, the new Inca emperor Atahualpa had an army of 80,000 men. Pizarro had 168. This shouldn't have been a battle. It should have been a non-event. And yet, in a stunning and brutal surprise attack, this tiny force of Spaniards captured the emperor and massacred thousands of his mostly unarmed attendants. While he was a captive, Atahualpa made one of the most famous ransom offers in all of history. He promised to fill a large room once with gold and twice over with silver. The treasure was collected from every corner of the empire. And once it was all delivered and melted down into ingots, the Spanish executed him anyway. So the empire was conquered, shattered. But this story of the Inca wasn't over. In a very strange way, its most enduring legacy was really just beginning. The Spanish systematically tried to erase Inca culture from existence. They built their churches directly on top of Inca temples, and you can literally see the original perfect stone foundations in Cusco today. They melted down priceless works of art for their raw metal, and they hunted down and buried the royal mummies, all in an attempt to wipe the slate clean. But ironically, the attempt to erase the Inca only made their memory more powerful. Groups that had once resented being ruled by the Inca now started to look back on it as a kind of lost golden age before the Spanish arrived. And today, that legacy is a profound source of national pride in Peru and across the Andes, a powerful symbol of indigenous identity and incredible resilience. Which leaves us with a final, thought-provoking question. The Spanish conquered the state, and they tore down its temples, but they could never fully erase the culture. It adapted, it survived, and it lives on in a million different ways. So while the physical empire is long gone, the idea of the Inca remains as powerful as ever.